Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome to this media briefing on the first set of results from the Sexual Violence Survey. So this large nationwide survey to measure the prevalence of sexual violence was carried out by the Central Statistics Office over the second half of last year. So the results have just been published at 11 o'clock on our website this morning. So this event has been run as a hybrid briefing, so with the in-person attendance in the press centre here in government buildings and in the online Teams channel. So I'd like to ask that all those on the online Teams channel, if they could please keep their microphones muted and their cameras off until after the presentations, till we open the floor for questions. So before going on, I'd just like to introduce the CSO team here at the top table. So I'm Richie McMahon. I'm Head of Social and Demographic Statistics in the CSO. On my left is Dr. Jessica Coyne. Jessica works in our Social Data Collection Unit. And on my right, I've Keith McSweeney and Helen McGrath from our Social Analysis Division. And behind me here, Lisa, is the sign language interpreter. So the Department of Justice requested that the CSO undertake this survey in order to establish a new baseline for the measurement of the prevalence of sexual violence in Ireland. And it's worth noting that very few, if any, countries run such a type of dedicated survey on sexual violence. So the CSO worked extremely closely with the Department of Justice, other government departments and agencies, the NGOs and national and international experts in the area. And we really would like to thank all those experts for their assistance over the past number of years in bringing this survey to fruition. This is a very complex and challenging survey which involves the collection of very personal and sensitive information. And in many cases it involved respondents recounting difficult and painful experiences of sexual violence. So we would like to thank all those participants in the survey for sharing their experiences with the CSO. The format for the presentation is that Keith will provide a background to the survey. Helen would then present the key concepts and definitions which are extremely important in interpreting the results of this survey. I'd ask you to hold off on questions until the end of the presentations. And what we do then is we'll take questions from the audience in government buildings here first, and then we'll open the online channel to questions. So if you want to ask a question through the Teams channel, if you could please type into the chat that you'd like to take the floor, and then we can give you the floor. Alternatively, you can type questions into the chat as the presentations and Q&A progresses, and we'll get back to them. So with that, I'll pass over to Keith, who will provide a background to the survey.
So thanks for that, Richie. The actual main starting point here really is the Scoping Group report from 2018, which recommended that a comprehensive national survey on the prevalence of sexual violence with a substantial number of participants should be undertaken. It's been 20 years since we have data for Ireland in this area, and there's strong societal and public policy interest in knowing more about the prevalence levels of sexual violence. These stats will now be official statistics and are embedded in our work plan to do again in kind of 10 years' time. Just a few key things to note, please. Surveys on sexual violence only are few. For example, some kind of countries do them as part of kind of crime surveys. This is clearly a sensitive topic, and the kind of reporting risk is one that has to be carefully managed throughout the kind of survey process. We need to be very careful about how we ask about these experiences, such that we better get to the prevalence levels. Also, research shows that kind of society's awareness of violence can impact on the kind of reported levels of violence. And this is a very important point. It will be completely natural to want to compare the levels we are publishing on here today with other surveys in this area, but we would strongly caution against actually doing that. There's a range of methodological reasons why it's very hard to kind of compare, and the differing levels of societal awareness around sexual violence across countries and across time is something to note. The CSO figures here today represent a new baseline for the measurement of kind of sexual violence levels in Ireland. CSO appreciates that behind the data are a range of individual stories which speak to the lived experience of those who have and those who have not experienced kind of sexual violence. The publication today provides a lot of important detail and insight on a very serious and sensitive societal issue, and I'll pass to Helen now, who will present on the data.
Thanks, Keith. So before I begin and talk about the data, and I know we all want to talk about the data, I really want to set the scene for you all, because this background information is really critical when you're trying to interpret the data that you're going to see shortly. So I'm just going to give you a very brief summary of the data collection of the data collection process. So this is a prevalence survey, not an incident survey. So we don't go down through every single incident that someone may have experienced within their lifetime. So this is the overall population proportion who have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. And this will be important when we talk about the more detailed sections in the publication, where it's actually based on the experience that affected the respondent the most. This was a nationally representative sample, so this is based on a random sample of people across Ireland, both a mix of age and sex, of urban and rural, all across Ireland, and we have no background knowledge of their people's prior life stories. This was an individual-based survey, so that means we asked people directly about their experiences, and it was asked only of those aged 18 and over. So we offered this survey to 3 modes or 3 approaches. So it was online, self-completion on a tablet, which was facilitated by an interviewer, but the interviewer was not present while the answers were submitted, and a paper survey as well, trying to give people as many options as possible to engage with this important survey. But the one common thread that wove these 3 together was self-completion, creating that environment, that space for someone to share those sensitive experiences with us without any judgment or prejudice within a part of that. So we got 4,500 responses to our survey, which is, what we were hoping to achieve with this, and it's quite a large data set. But what I haven't described here is the amount of design and preparation and testing that we did prior to the survey going in the field. And one principle we tried to ensure was that people were not re-traumatized or re-victimized as they went down through these very sensitive questions. So we're very careful with the questions and the language we used. Just to touch on some of the concepts within sexual violence survey. So we use the consent principle throughout this survey. So this is used to gather their experiences. The age of consent in Ireland is 17. And this is our cutoff point when we're talking about adult experiences and childhood experiences. So for those aged 17 and over, that's considered adult experience in this publication. And from earliest memory up until the 17th birthday is for childhood experiences. Just to be aware that for children, for those under the age of 17, consent really isn't appropriate or relevant to the discussion. So you will see in our publication that we are using terms like non-consensual and unwanted, and that's the reason why we have this terminology. Please be aware as well that for childhood sexual violence experiences, we do include non-contact experiences. So these are experiences where, for example, someone might have been shared a pornographic imagery or videos that they did not want to see, or that someone was persuaded or made to pose in a sexually suggestive manner. Surveys were asked of adults, so it was asked of people aged 18 and over. So they were asked to recall their experiences from childhood. So this publication will not provide insights into the current levels of child sexual violence, so just to be aware of that. Another key definition I'm going to touch on before we go through the data is what is sexual violence. So this covers a broad spectrum of experiences, of non-consensual experiences, from non-contact to non-consensual sexual intercourse, some of the most serious violations of your own personal dignity. So this is based on national and international research. And just to be aware that violence, sometimes associated with the use of force, and that is included within this survey, but it can also mean having a marked or powerful effect on people. And we have some of the examples there, what this includes. So teenagers, persuading a friend to watch a pornographic video when they didn't want to see it, someone being persuaded to pose in a sexually suggestive way, up until someone being threatened to have sex with them, or someone who had sexual intercourse while they were asleep. Just to touch on non-consensual sexual intercourse that I just mentioned there. So this includes people who have ever experienced as an adult another person who coerced threatened or forced the respondent in order to make them have sexual intercourse without their consent. It also includes experiences where the respondent could not give consent or stop what was happening because the respondent was asleep, passed out, or under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So this variable is based on consent, and this underpins obviously our criminal legislation on rape and sexual assault. But this wording was used because this is how the variable has been collected. And just to be aware that, as we tried in the survey to use, very non-judgmental language as we were collecting the information, as we're publishing, we're also using that language as well, so that when respondents look at this, they will actually see their own experiences reflected back from them in the data. So this is the reason why we're using this type of terminology. I'm just going to touch on a few key themes before I go in through the data, just to kind of outline what we'll be sharing with you today. So females are more likely to experience sexual violence at a higher level than males. So 52% of women have experienced this compared to 28% of men. Younger people are more likely to have reported experiencing sexual violence at a higher level than older people. So 52% of those aged 18 to 24 have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime compared to 27% of those aged 65 and over. People who experience sexual violence know the perpetrator. 80% of people who had experienced sexual violence in their lifetime knew at least one of the persons involved within that. And females are more likely to disclose than men. So 53% of women have disclosed to someone, whether that be one person, many people, or a group or organisation, compared with 34% of males. So if you leave today just knowing those 4 key themes, I'll feel I've got my job done. But we will go down through the data in a little bit more detail. Now, this is not going to be an exhaustive list of all the charts and tables that is included within this report. This is just a flavour of some of the key points within that. So, 40% of people, of adults in Ireland, have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. 3 in 10 adults have experienced sexual violence as a child, 23% of adults, 29% of adults. And almost 1 in 4, or just over 1 in 4, 26% of adults have experienced sexual violence as an adult. So we can see here some very clear levels, but if we break it down by sex, we can see a different picture, where females are more likely to have experienced these categories of sexual violence than males. So we can see 12% of males have experienced sexual violence as an adult, 22% of males have experienced sexual violence as a child, and 28% of males have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. 39% of females have experienced sexual violence as an adult. 36% of females have experienced sexual violence as a child, and 52% of females have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. Looking then at an age breakdown on sexual violence in their lifetime, we can see again clear differences here. So for males, it ranges from 39% for those aged 18 to 24, down to 17% for those aged 65 and over. For females, we see a higher level. So 65% of females aged 18 to 24 have experienced some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. And this goes down to 35% of females aged 65 and over who have experienced this. Moving on then to, I suppose, the overlap and intersectionality of these kinds of experiences. So people could have experienced something as a child only, as an adult only, or both as an adult and as a child. So for males, 6% of males, of those aged 18 and over in Ireland, have experienced sexual violence as an adult only. 15% of males have experienced sexual violence as a child only. And 6% of males have experienced sexual violence both as an adult and as a child. Looking at the female data, so for women in Ireland, 16% of women have experienced sexual violence as an adult only. 12% of females have experienced sexual violence as a child only. And 23% of women have experienced sexual violence both as an adult and as a child. So we're seeing this multiplicity of experiences, particularly for females. Looking then at the types of categories of sexual violence. So here I've listed 5 different categories. So for non-consensual sexual intercourse, we've touched on this already, where someone was coerced, threatened or forced in order to have sexual intercourse, or whether they could not give consent or stop what was happening. We also have attempted sexual intercourse, where the intercourse was attempted but it did not occur. We have non-consensual sexual touching. So this is where someone's breasts or genitals were touched without their consent, or whether they were made to touch someone else's breasts or genitals without their consent. We also have other sexual contact. So this includes kind of non-specified sexual contact that may have occurred or have been attempted. And then we have final category of sexual non-contact. So I mentioned this previously. So this is where someone had a pornographic video shared with them where they didn't want to see it, whether someone had masturbated in front of them, whether someone had been, persuaded to make sexually suggestive imagery. So looking at this and the experience for females, 21%, or just over 1 in 5 women, have experienced non-consensual sexual intercourse in their lifetime. And we can see as well 43% of females have experienced non-consensual sexual touching in their lifetime. And just to touch on that breakdown for males, we can see that 5% of males have experienced non-consensual sexual intercourse in their lifetime. You can see here as well that 17% of males have experienced non-consensual sexual touching in their lifetime. And also you can see high rates for males for sexual non-contact as well, with 16% of men aged 18 and over in Ireland have experienced sexual non-contact violence experiences. So now I'm just going to concentrate on experiences for people as an adult. So this is adulthood experiences. So what we can see here for females, 18% of women have experienced non-consensual sexual intercourse as an adult. You can also hear high rates for non-consensual sexual touching, with 33% of women in Ireland experiencing this. And as we look at the breakdown for males, we can see 3% of males have experienced non-consensual sexual intercourse as an adult. And we can see here the highest rate for males is non-consensual sexual touching, at 9% of men in Ireland have experienced this as an adult. Looking now just at that breakdown of adult experiences by age, we're seeing a difference, and we've just captured here 18 to 24 compared with 65 and over. So 12% of adults aged 18 to 24 have experienced non-consensual sexual intercourse, compared with 4% of adults aged 65 years and over. Looking again at the area or the category with the highest rate, which is non-consensual sexual touching, 28% of those aged 18 to 24 have experienced this, compared with 10% of those aged 65 and over. Looking now, I suppose, at that non-consensual sexual intercourse and just focusing in on those where it happened, where they could not give consent or stop what was happening because they were asleep, passed out, or under the influence of drink or drugs. So what we can see here is the age breakdown for this category, and we can see 7% of adults aged 18 to 24 have experienced this. The highest rate is found in the age category of 25 to 34, where 12% of adults in this 12% of adults in this age category have experienced this non-consensual sexual intercourse where they could not give consent. And we can see that it drops then to roughly 1% of adults aged 65 and over who have experienced this. So I'm just going to touch now on the childhood experiences. So we talked about lifetime adult experiences, and now we're just going to move to the categories for child experiences. So 7% of adults in Ireland have experienced unwanted sexual intercourse as a child. Highest rates you can see are in unwanted sexual touching, with 24% of adults having experienced this as a child. 25% of adults have experienced unwanted sexual non-contact experiences as a child. And looking now at that breakdown by sex, so looking at males first, so 2% of males have experienced unwanted sexual intercourse as a child. Highest rates were in unwanted sexual non-contact experiences, with 16% of adults or males experiencing this, and followed by unwanted sexual touching at 11% of men in Ireland having experienced this as a child. And now we're just going to take just a brief look at that overlap of experiences, where someone could have experienced contact abuse, contact sexual violence and non-contact sexual violence, either on its own or experiencing both. So 9% of both male and females have experienced this contact only, compared with 6% of males who experienced non-contact only, compared with 11% of females. And 6% of males have experienced both contact and non-contact experiences, compared with 16% of females. So that's looking at overall prevalence. The next few slides I'm going to show you are based on more detailed information asked of those who reported within the survey that they experienced sexual violence. So please be aware that they may have experienced multiple experiences of this in their lifetime, or as an adult or as a child. And these further charts and slides are just based on the experience of the respondent that affected the respondent the most. So overall, people know the perpetrator that's involved in the incident or in the sexual violence experience. And we're just showing here an age breakdown. So from 72% of people aged 65 and over who have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime know the perpetrator, compared to 8 in 10 who know the perpetrator in the incidents from the age group of 25 to 54. So people know who the perpetrator is. And the next few slides I'm just going to show is going to touch on who that person was within that. Before I do that, I just want to talk about those who experience sexual violence in their lifetime, by their relationship with the perpetrator. So whether or not it was with a partner only, with a non-partner only, or with both a partner and a non-partner. So here we can see 24% of males have experienced it with a partner only, compared with 25% of females. 52% of people who've experienced sexual violence, of males who've experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, have experienced it with a non-partner only, compared with 36% of females. And 25% of males have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime with both a partner and a non-partner, compared with 38% of females. And just looking at that breakdown of adult experiences with a non-partner by the type of relationship with that perpetrator. So here we can see just the age breakdown of 18 to 24 compared with 65 years and over. And we're just going to focus in on, I suppose, three main categories here. So we have 34% of those who aged 18 to 24 who experienced sexual violence as an adult experienced this with a friend or an acquaintance, compared with 21% of those aged 65 and over. 40% of those aged 18 to 24 who experienced sexual violence as an adult with a non-partner experienced this with a stranger, compared with 27% of those aged 65 and over. And another key difference in this is you can see that 1% of those aged 18 to 24 experienced sexual violence with a non-partner with a person in authority, so someone like a boss or a doctor, compared with 14% of those aged 65 and over. There's some interesting differences in the patterns of sexual violence perpetration there. I'm just going to look now at the childhood experiences of unwanted non-contact sexual violence by the nature of the relationship with the perpetrator. So I'm just going to point out two main differences here. So you can see that 35% of males who have experienced unwanted non-contact sexual violence have experienced this with a friend or an acquaintance, compared with 17% of females. 34% of females who have experienced unwanted non-contact sexual violence have experienced this with a stranger, compared with 12% of males in this category. And the rest are broadly similar, but it's just interesting to point out those differences within that. And then looking at, again, the childhood experience and looking at the contact sexual violence by the nature of the perpetrator, they seem to be broadly in line with some small differences. For example, 23% of females have experienced this with a family member or relative, compared with 16% of males. But they're broadly similar perpetration patterns here. So now I'm going to touch on disclosure. So again, this was only asked of people who had experienced or disclosed their experience as part of the survey. So disclosure means whether you told someone about the experience, whether that be one person, many people, or a group or organisation. So what we can see here is that 34% of males who have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime have disclosed to someone, compared with 53% of females. Looking at, I suppose, disclosure rates by the types of violence that they may have experienced, what we can see here is 43% of males have experienced this as an adult only, or have 43% of males who have experienced this have disclosed to someone, compared to 35% of females who have experienced this as an adult only. We can see 23% of males who have experienced sexual violence as a child only have disclosed to someone, compared to 49% of females who've experienced sexual violence as a child only. And then for those who've experienced sexual violence both as an adult and as a child, 49% of males have told someone, compared with 68% of females. So just looking at the disclosure rates by age breakdown for males, we can see it's broadly similar, that roughly between 39 and 28% of persons or males who have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime have disclosed to someone. But when we look at the disclosure rates for females by age, we can see a clearer pattern that younger females are more likely to have disclosed their experiences of sexual violence to someone than those who are older. So 62% of females who have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime have disclosed to someone, compared to 47% of those aged 65 and over who've experienced this have disclosed to someone. So there's an awful lot of material that we've just gone down through there, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions after this, but I just want to touch on what's coming up next. So this survey represented quite a significant data collection event, and we're trying to, ensure that messages get out to everyone, so we're publishing this as a series of publications. So it's going to contain descriptive statistics, and we've roughly about 90 tables that's going to be published over a course of 6 publications. So obviously we're here today with the main results, but what I'm just going to touch on briefly is what's going to be contained in the next reports and when they're going to be coming out. So the next report after this will be on adult experiences, and that's we're aiming to publish that on the 9th of May. That's going to contain information on partner and non-partner experiences, and it's also going to contain additional socio-demographic breakdowns as well. As you can see in the main results, we've just shown you age and sex breakdowns. We're going to have more granular detail on socio-demographic breakdowns in the next publication. We're also going to talk about the frequency of experiences and who was involved. We'll talk about the duration of the experience and the location of sexual violence experience as well for those who've experienced it as an adult. The next publication after this will be the childhood experiences publication. AIM published that towards the end of May at the start of June. So this will contain information on contact and non-contact experiences, and will also include that additional socio-demographic breakdown. Much like the adult publication, it's going to talk about the frequency of experiences, who was involved, the duration and location of the experience, as well as the respondent's view on why it stopped. The next publication after this will be on disclosure. We aim to publish that in June, and this will have information broken down by adult and child experiences, and will contain information about, who was told, how long did it take you to do it, the reasons why you did or didn't disclose, whether you disclosed to the Gardaí or whether you used any key services. The next publication after this will concentrate on sexual harassment. This we're aiming to publish towards the end of June and start of July. And this will contain information on sexual harassment that occurred in the last 12 months. It'll contain information on the type of behaviour that you experienced across your daily life. It'll contain information on who did it and whether you told. And finally, the last publication we will have will be in July, and it will be about attitudes. This will be based on responses from those who did not disclose any experiences of sexual harassment or violence within the survey. It will contain broad public opinion on so-called rape myths, and will also contain information on the perception of the frequency or the commonality of sexual violence in Ireland. And now, to sum up, I'm going to hand back to Richie for concluding remarks.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Keith. Just to reiterate our sincerest thanks to the respondents to this survey for their participation. I'd also like to thank again all the teams in the CSO, the government departments and agencies, the NGO sector, and other national and international experts for their input, contributions, assistance and support throughout this process. And finally, as you've seen from Helen's presentation of the results, these results may cause distress to some people. So if you have been affected by these results, help is available from a range of helplines which are contained in the report and on the CSO website. So with that, I'd like to open the floor first to any questions from the audience here in the Government Press Centre. And maybe if you are asking a question, if you could just introduce yourself. So I see a lady here.
Helen Coyne from the Irish Independent. I'm just really interested in one of the headline statistics there on the difference in age. So 22% of those aged 18 to 24 experience sexual violence both as an adult and a child, compared with 8% of those aged 65 or over. I know it's hard to extract certain meaning or sentiments from the figures, but in your experience, do you think that's because a younger generation is more likely to identify sexual violence, or is it because a younger generation is more exposed to sexual violence?
Thanks, Ellen, for that. That's a really good question, and kind of comes to the heart of trying to capture data on sexual violence. It's very challenging. There's so many different facets to it. In terms of that age breakdown, like in terms of the survey that we've designed, we've asked very specific questions of people. We've tested them as much as we can. So what we can say is the data is as it is. But in terms of those elements of societal awareness and personal awareness of experiences, what we've seen from other countries is, yes, it's probably leaning into this and playing into this as well. That they're more likely that younger people are probably more aware of what is and isn't appropriate, maybe compared to older age groups. So we have seen that from other surveys as well and other international data sets on this.
And also, there's probably an age effect in terms of the actual recall, like that this is a kind of lifetime survey. So older people might necessarily kind of recall stuff that happened maybe 30, 40 years ago also. But that age effect is strongly signposted in a range of kind of international kind of reports here as well. Yeah.
John Sullivan, RTE News. I see from your statistics that while more women are reported of experiencing sexual violence, it would appear that significantly less men are willing to disclose it. So is there a possibility that a greater number of men are experiencing sexual violence, but perhaps are not willing to disclose it?
Yeah, Joan, again, thanks very much for that. So there's a real issue when you're collecting information on sexual violence experiences to account for an underreporting risk. So we've tried as much as we can through the survey to limit that risk as possible by using, for example, the mode in terms of self-completion, by using behaviourally specific questions to really focus in on whether this happened or didn't happen. But again, as this research will answer some questions but raise more, it's probably likely that that's what's happening as well within this. So perhaps people may not necessarily recognise those experiences within this context of sexual violence.
Sean Bowers with the Irish Times. I was just wondering, have we looked into whether individuals in the LGBTQ community were more likely to experience sexual violence, or the gender of the perpetrators and things like that?
Yeah, so perfect. So in terms of what's going to be coming up in the next publications, we're going to be providing that breakdown of sociodemographic information. So we will be sharing that with you in the next publication for both adult and child experiences as well. And again, I suppose just to be aware when we're talking about the sociodemographic experiences, when we're publishing it, and we'll reiterate this again, it'll be their demographic information at the time the survey was collected. So again, like that for people with disabilities as well, something to factor in when we're looking at it. In terms of the breakdown, in terms of gender identity and gender of the perpetrator, we have that as part of the information that we've collected. So we'll be publishing that as part of the adult and child experience publications as well.
Thank you very much, Helen McGee from RCSI, and huge compliments to everybody on the work presented today. And in some ways, the high rates of non-disclosure until now just to signal that you actually got people to tell you something they hadn't told anybody else, which is a marker of really sensitive research study. Just two practical questions. One is about the response rate. From of the 4,500, what does that represent in terms of response rate? And the other then is in terms of the more detailed surveys, do you have people do you have details on individuals of non-Irish origin, and was there any language arrangement made for people who couldn't maybe complete this in English?
Yeah, no bother at all. So in terms of the response rate, we got about 37% response rate overall. So this actually is quite good compared to other international surveys on this sensitive topic. So again, remembering that this was, self-completion, predominantly online, and again, a very sensitive topic. So we're really happy with our response rate, and we've been able to weight and calibrate back up to the population. So we're confident on that. In terms of, the kind of more detailed information on non-Irish background of people, so as part of the socio-demographic information, we will have whether someone was Irish or non-Irish. But in terms of, the location of where the experience is, we're not going to have a geographic breakdown. These are people who are obviously living in Ireland and will need support no matter where these experiences happened. But yeah, thanks, Hannah, for that.
Elaine Mears, RCNI. Firstly, to just say congratulations on the research. It's really fantastic. I'm really struck by the figure on relationship to perpetrator, and particularly those with a partner or ex-partner relationship. And I'm looking at a graph here, and it's telling me that 65% of females who were subjected to sexual violence were subjected to violence by a perpetrator at some time, or by a partner at some time in their lifetime, and 48% of males. And that's massive.
It's of those who have experienced sexual violence.
Yes, who have experienced it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that breakdown. Yeah, it is. It's stark information, what we're providing today. And we've tried as best as we can to provide high quality information. We've put an awful lot of work in the design and the testing, as you know, as you've seen, as we've built this. So it's uncomfortable reading at times, very uncomfortable. But we'll have more information on that kind of non-partner and partner element as we move through the adult publications as well. So we'll be able to provide more insight into this issue in the next publication.
Okay, do we have we've another question here? Yeah.
Me Griffin with the Irish Examiner. Just on the difference in disclosure rates again between males and females, what would you be hoping that information could shed light on?
I suppose really it's for us in the CSO, we're providing data and insight into this issue, and it's really for, I suppose, those who are experts in the field to go and use this information and to see what needs to be done. So in terms, I think, really of awareness of what sexual violence is, and that there are supports there for people, and I suppose this is ultimately what we're doing, providing data to policymakers to build better policies to go and try and address this issue, but also to go and build better supports for those who have experienced this in their lifetime.
Clean it there, Avon, please. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Clean Rape Crisis Network Ireland. Can I echo what Hannah McGee said here in terms of congratulating you on this, and in terms of the small part we played, it's been a pleasure working with you on it. One of the questions, and I think we've touched on it a few times, but in terms of its baseline, so we're now starting from our baseline, but you've built in some comparisons across age, but there's limitations in what we can assume on that. And as you say, we need further research to really understand what those comparisons are telling us about the life experience of someone over 65 and the life experience and the world that the 18 to 24-year-old experiences. Do you have any advice for us in terms of the next steps in research and understanding those differences?
What a question, Cleta. In terms of our bread and butter, we are quantitative surveys, this is what we do all the time. But what we've learned from running a quantitative survey on sexual violence, is such a nuanced topic that perhaps more qualitative research is really what's needed here. And particularly when you're looking at perhaps those groups who are possibly more vulnerable to these types of experiences, while they're part of our sample, we're not going to be able to publish on perhaps, migrants, perhaps people who have, come in, refugees. There's a lot of areas we won't be able to talk on. But in terms of further research, I think, possibly qualitative. But we are more than happy to share what we've learned on this journey with you and to try and build better research as we move forward.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be something of a qualitative nature, because you're trying to disentangle the substantive event. Did someone experience sexual violence substantively? And then you've got the recall issue and you've got the awareness issue. So trying to disentangle that from a quantitative type survey would be really, really too hard. So we're really open. I think this is the actual kind of starting point for a whole range of other work that has to be done to really try to tease out the actual key messages.
Yeah.
Elaine Burns, DCU. We've come a long way from that first meeting of the scoping group in 2018, Helen. But thank you all so much for all of the work that has gone into realising, I suppose, what you've presented today was our wish list from the scoping group is the most salient and important points and data that we needed. And now that all of that is done and we've been presented with the results, and not wishing to make more work for you, but how frequently is it going to be repeated?
No problem. Whatever I give you want more, Elaine. That's no problem. I know. Look, we've committed to repeat this again in 10 years' time. As part of us signing up to this in 2019, we've said, yes, we will do it again. Now, there's a big ask on this, and obviously we'll have to, start again kind of when we're designing it. But what we've done in this iteration is to try and future-proof as far as possible, to try and maintain some of those key elements so that we'll be able to compare from this new baseline to the next information again. But we have come a long way from the scoping group report. So.
Just to add to that as well, we're conscious that it is kind of 10 years away, and there's a new agency about to be set up, and there's a whole range of data needs flowing from the recent strategy document on domestic and sexual gender-based violence.
The third national strategy,
Yeah, so CSO is really open to working with the Department of Justice and that new agency to identify what additional surveys can be done within that kind of 10-year gap to meet needs here.
And I think on an international basis, the whole area of gender-based violence, there are requirements coming at EU level which will be taken into account as part of this process. Yeah. If there's no further questions from the room, then we might just move to the online chat. So there was a question there from Michaela around the sample frame. So maybe I might pass to Jess, who might answer that question.
Yeah, sure. I'll give a bit of information around that. So generally for our social statistics surveys, our sampling is done at a household level, and each survey requires their own survey design. So specifically for the sexual violence survey, our survey sample was a stratified simple random sample. So just to explain that a bit, the simple random sample. So once you were of 18 years of age or over, an individual was completely randomly selected from the population of Ireland. And just the stratification bit just ensures that that each population group was representative as accurately as possible in the sample. And this was done across age and sex and around the country, so to make sure we had an urban-rural balance. So I hope that...
Thanks, Jess. So we have a contribution from Anne Doyle thanking us on the research. Will you provide a breakdown of alcohol involvement, both the perpetrator and the victim? Yes, so I'll pass to Helen.
Yeah, exactly. So look, in terms of the questions that we've designed and questions that we asked within the survey, we're really, really cautious of not re-traumatising victims or perhaps blaming them as part of the questionnaire. So how we have captured that element of alcohol involvement is through the non-consensual sexual intercourse where they could not give consent. And we also have, as part of the disclosure publication, we will have, some information there in terms of reasons that perhaps alcohol was involved in the situation. Maybe that's the reason why you did or did not disclose. But the reality is whether or not there's alcohol involved or not, this has happened without your consent. So we're really cautious within the survey about this. and not to, re-victimize or re-traumatize people. And this survey, again, as I kind of mentioned previously, it'll answer a lot, but there's still more that we need to learn, and there will be further research that will be required as part of it. But you will see this information in terms of alcohol involvement in both the adult publication and also in the disclosure publication as well.
Yeah, and there's another question there from Maeve Lewis around the comparability with Savvy, so maybe we might reiterate that again. I think it's an important question.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a completely natural thing to want to compare over time and across countries. Unfortunately, there's a very significant apples and oranges kind of effect here, that the data collection methodologies in particular, how questions are framed, the different legal concepts across countries, means that it's really hard to actually kind of compare, and also to throw into that mix the different awareness levels across time as well. So unfortunately, we can't comment here whether prevalence has changed over time or not, but I think we've kind of given a clear presentation of a new baseline now for Ireland.
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
Yep.
Yeah, Danielle McLaughlin has again thanked us for her research and then included a suggestion to include some aspect of sexual exploitation in further surveys to better inform policy and strategy development. So thanks for that. Kenny Doyle has asked about the level of detail that will be included in the socio-demographic data to be released, and he references social class or ethnicity, so maybe Helen might address
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll be providing more information in the adult and child experiences. As you can understand, there's an awful lot of information within this, and we're just trying to, provide it in a way that everyone can digest it. But in terms of, determining prevalence by social class or ethnicity, we will have ethnicity as part of the socio-demographic breakdown. But we won't have social class as part of it. So we will be using kind of our standard CSO kind of demographic breakdown. So education level, the highest level of education achieved. The ethnicity based on the census question. We'll have, sexual orientation based on other questions we developed in other surveys. So you'll see both in the adult and the child publications that breakdown. And as well, we also will include whether a person had a disability or not. I'll also reiterate again that point that it's asked of, it's their status at the point the survey was asked as well. So we're not asking if you were perhaps disabled or perhaps you were presenting as a different gender, or maybe you in terms of your sexual orientation as well. So we will have all that information contained in the next publications.
Okay, thanks, Helen. I think we're up to date in terms of the online chat function. So maybe before I conclude, just to ask either persons online or in the room if they have any further questions or contribution before I close.
We appreciate there's an awful lot within this publication. Yeah. Like, this is uncomfortable reading, I understand. And look, we're here. I have my email and phone number there. Like, we're here to answer questions afterwards. We really want this data to be used. People shared very sensitive information with us over the course of this survey, and we want to make sure that it's used to its utmost.
Certainly, and if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Sorry, we've a question there.
Shirley Scott from Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. Can I just ask one last question, just in terms of the actual gender breakdown of the respondents? Will we find that somewhere in the background notes, Helen?
So in terms of who replied back in terms of the sample itself, we don't have that broken down in the background notes, but I can talk to you on that. So like in terms of the split, we got, I think it was about 45%, so 55% female, 45% males. And again, this speaks to the quality and how we can be confident that this is, capturing. We got, responses from people who both did and didn't experience sexual violence. We got a broad cross-section across Ireland, both in terms of gender and sex, and also ages as well. So we're really confident with the data that we've produced. This is high-quality information that we're going to be able to use.
Great, thanks. Great report. Well done.
Okay.
Shirley.
Thank you. So I think that's about it. So look, thanks to everyone for attending, both online and in person. And as Helen has outlined, there's a lot more data to come from this survey over the coming months. So thanks again to everyone for all their support. Thank you.
Thank you very much.